Hello, in this issue of Photogrammetry Raw and the next few, we're going to be talking about, well, what everything in cameras involves around, and that's light. Now, while we're in a great inside studio, we can light and control things as much as we want, but as soon as we get outside, the world changes completely. Light changes on a continual basis. Whether that's a simple thing like a sun going out behind a cloud, or low light and the different colours of light we get at different times of the day, the different intensities, looking at shadows and the material that the light's bouncing off, shadows and highlights. It becomes a really tricky thing to get consistency right across the process during the whole day. And also sometimes it limits us as to what we do. I often hear photogrammetrists saying, oh, it's great, it's a cloudy day. Well, why wait and why just photograph on a cloudy day? If you could photograph in any weather conditions, wouldn't it be good? Wouldn't it be great to be able to fly my drone in low light conditions or in the bright sun? Wouldn't it be great to be able to photograph a telecom tower in Texas in the midday sun of a white object where it's just going to be overexposed and clipped? Well, there are ways that we can deal with this, and that's what we're going to be sharing over the next few episodes of this. We're going to be looking at a thing called dynamic range and how we can harness that and improve the quality of the imagery before we go to the next stage. An awful lot of reality capture workflows, like point cloud colorization, whatever, photogrammetry, 360 pano stitching, even your basic inspection photography you might be using when you're doing a structural inspection. All of them can be improved. And that doesn't matter, and it doesn't really matter which camera you're using. You can be using your iPhone, your mobile phone, you can be using a point and shoot, you can be using a digital SLR, a mirrorless, you can go up to a metric medium format camera that costs £50,000. All the images can be improved, and that's what we're going to be showing you. Now, where do we start with this? Well, the thing to look at is, if you're looking at a scene, the amount of light that is in that scene can change dramatically. I could have bright reflective surfaces, I could have dark shadows, and what that is called is the dynamic range. Now, cameras are not particularly good at capturing dynamic range. They can't capture all of it because the difference between a bright sun and a dark is huge, and we'll be talking about just how huge in the coming episodes. But what we can say is the camera can sample bits of it. Now, which bit of it do we need? That's what we're going to be talking about. And then we'll be talking about how we can, in our workflow, what can we do to consistently improve our photogrammetry. Now, our sort of spatial imaging, or every time we use a camera when we go out. One of the issues that scares people sometimes is they look and go, well, I've got this photo editing software like a Lightroom or a Capture One or a DxO or whatever it might be, and they look at it and go, but I haven't got time. I can see how they do it for one image, but I haven't got time to do it for all of them. I might have 100, 1,000, 10,000 images. So what we'll be talking about is not just how you can change an individual image, which I think you need to fundamentally understand, but how you can then batch process things, and some of the softwares that you can help you do that, and some of the photographic in-camera things you can do to improve and speed up the process later on. So we're going to be talking about what I call 32-bit photogrammetry. Other people look at it as and call it HDR, but it is high dynamic range photography, where we're using bracketed images or single images and process them, but it's 32, but 32-bit is like HDR, but with a twist, as you'll find out. It's not scary, and the great thing about this is this doesn't cost a fortune. Yeah, it's going to cost a little bit to invest in the training to do it. That's your time, maybe a couple of $100 or something. But the software you need is not going to break the bank. It always strikes me as somewhat ridiculous that people will expend tens of £1,000s on their drone or their scanner and think nothing of that. But when it comes down to actually looking at a fundamental part of the workflow, they just put their hands up and go, well, it's too complicated, or just want to take their SD card and slam it into their photogrammetry software and produce a beautiful model. The problem is, as you and I know, it doesn't quite work like that, Because one of the problems, if you don't do the image adjustments and maximize and optimize those images before you put them into whatever workflow you're using, you'll start, especially with the highlights at this end of the histogram. You'll get to know and love histograms by the time we've finished. If you get clip data, the equivalent of that is if I was to print it out, that pixel doesn't print. And the same thing applies when we're talking about stitching and registration, aerial triangulation in photogrammetry, whether I'm trying to stitch 360-degree panoramas or do big gigapixel stitching so I can see a whole building or a whole structure in one image. All of them rely on having data. And if there's no data in that particular area, particularly if it's near an overlap, then you'll start building in errors that don't need to be there. But it's not just errors. You've got a lack of data. You've got no color data in, and there's nothing there that the software algorithms which are used for meshing can latch onto. So consequently, when you produce a mesh model in many instances, if you haven't got a consistent image, you will find that you'll get all sorts of weird artifacts. And if anybody's done any editing of those and tried to fix them, you just know how complicated, tedious, and time-consuming it can be to produce a great quality mesh model wherever you're going to display it, in your online Narrow app or Unity or Unreal, whatever way you're going. If you could get and recover the data from every single pixel, it makes common sense that you're going to get a better model. That's what we call rich pixel, because that's what we try and do. We're not so much bothered about registration or LiDAR. Those things impact, of course, but without controlling and a high quality and a consistent image to put into that workflow, you're always going to have a problem at some point. So we believe, or I believe, the fundamental skill of an awful lot of geospatial capture engineers, or whatever we call ourselves, is actually going to be looking at a camera. And this particularly is coming to light as well as we move over the last year to things like NeRFs and Gaussian splats, because the limit of their quality is the limit of the accuracy of the image that we use. I think you'd all agree, if you get an overexposure, there's nothing that a Gaussian splat or NeRFing can do to fix that if it's got no data. So this applies not just to the conventional workflows of photogrammetry and point cloud, reality capture. It applies to the next generation of visualization software and platforms and viewers that we're going to be using. It makes sense to be able to understand what our cameras can do and what they can't do, but more importantly, what you can do to fix them. And the great thing about this is it doesn't cost a fortune. We're talking about softwares that cost $20, $30 a month. This isn't big licenses. You don't need huge amounts of software and IT to actually do this, probably less than you would for manipulating point clouds. Yeah, if you do more, if you do more processing, then there's going to be impacts on time. But what I say is, look, the time you spent making sure your images are good quality before you put them into the workflow is going to save you much, much more later on. And probably your competition will be doing the same thing. So you want to be able to have your models and images at least as good as them. So what we're going to be doing over the next 3 or 4 videos is talking about a process, which I think anybody could do, providing they've got a bit of patience and they realise that it's also it's fun. I mean, to me, scanning is the single most boring job on the planet. Press a button, move. When you start looking at reality capture and not just capturing geometry, you start to look at your environment in a completely different way. You start to look at where the light is coming in, how the light is going to change during the day. Where are the shadows? Where are the highlights? Where are the things that are going to cause me issues when I start to scan them? Not just, stainless steel pipes or things, but simple things. It's really interesting to see when you start looking at, as we'll see examples, when you start to look at where you get an overexposure in clipping, it's often in surfaces you never thought you would. But we'll go on to that. And probably the best way to do it is if we go onto the computer and start to show you some examples, and we'll start from there in this journey to help you make yourself more confident in using your camera. and acquiring a new skill. Personally, I think this is going to be the core skill for anybody who works in the geospatial sector, understanding cameras and what they can do. You can use your scanners, you can use your total stations and traversing, but here is a real skill that you can acquire. And hopefully you can have a bit of fun with me. Okay, let's go to the computer and have a go. All right, thanks.